Hello, this continues my series of videos on culture, this one dealing with its relationship to group membership. Culture both defines group membership and differentiates one group or society from another. Each group has its own distinctive culture, and culture is rooted in social action as a member of the group. It is a major part of our socialization into the group and our continuing sense of identity with it. It provides a basis for mutual understanding and ease of social interaction with other group members. However, whilst we take for granted the cultural beliefs, values and norms of our own group, we are liable to find those of other groups to be strange or even offensive. Culture thus serves as a major social marker, differentiating one group from another. This differentiating role of culture is most obvious in the case of language. If I do not speak your language, it becomes much harder for us to communicate, and in the absence of an interpreter or a handy dictionary, we may have to resort to mime even to find out basic information such as where is the bathroom, where does the museum close, also when does the museum close. Google Translate now makes this easier, but it's still far from perfect. More generally, each culture carries with it a host of assumptions about what constitutes correct behavior and which values and beliefs are valid and which are not. Unless they are familiar with these assumptions, those from outside the group can easily misunderstand and be misunderstood by group members. Without even realizing what they're doing, outsiders can break sacred taboos or offend normative expectations. Thus, the conservative Asians and Middle Easterners who are horrified by the physical affection publicly displayed by some Western tourists, or what they perceive as the immodesty of their dress, or those English who deride loud foreigners who have not yet learned how to queue. Even within a society, divisions of caste, class, and education may be indicated by cultural markers such as accent, occupation, and school history. For sociologists, the evident groupness of culture has led to the questions of how best to describe both the cultural differences within societies and the cultural aspects of the relationship between different social groups. For social anthropologists, on the other hand, the more interesting question has been to identify what aspects of culture are general to all human beings, regardless of their particular group membership. Only small isolated societies are likely to be culturally homogeneous. Cultural variation within a society is more common. This variation may be of three kinds: subcultural, countercultural, and immigrant, with immigrants and their descendants either later integrating into the host society or remaining separate as an enclave community. Subcultures are groups within the wider society which have their own distinctive norms and values. Many of the most distinctive are based on religious, ethnic, and regional differences. In the United States, for example, they include the Old Order Amish, who are geographically concentrated in their own rural communities, wear distinctive clothes, and seek to separate themselves as much as possible from the worldliness of wider society. Again, the various concentrations of people of particular ethnicities in different parts of Greater New York, including neighborhoods which are dominated by African Americans, Chinese Americans, Hasidic Jews, and so on. Or again, the reservations on which various of the indigenous American nations live, and the distinctive folk ways of so-called Appalachian hillbillies. Each of these groups see themselves as somehow distinctive from the American mainstream, whether through language, religion, or particular forms of dress and behavior. In general, membership is by birth, and all of these groups have long histories and shared traditions. There are also more recent and perhaps more transient groups which people may join voluntarily, including some religious cults, I put cults in inverted commas there, bikers, and a changing medley of groups made up largely of young people, and often focused on a particular cultural or musical style, including, over the past century, bohemians, beatniks, hippies, punks, and goths. There are also the American high school cliques, so often portrayed in Hollywood movies, often with a contrast between the sports-oriented jocks and the science-oriented geeks and nerds. Here we have a couple of pictures of American subcultures, an Amish family buggy on the left, and New York's Chinatown on the right. A third group of subcultures are those made up of organized criminal fraternities and secret societies, sometimes existing in secret. They include the Chinese triads, the Japanese yakuza, the Italian mafia, and similar organizations, as well as the Freemasons and other secret fraternities. Their memberships are often largely or exclusively male, and members recognize each other by special insignia, tattoos, or manners of greeting. There are also occupational and corporate subcultures. Whenever a particular occupational group or employer facilitates the development of a strong and long-term sense of identity amongst its members. Some companies encourage such a sense of identity with company uniforms and even songs and leisure activities. More generally, those who join a long-established company are likely to find that there are formal and informal rules of behavior, including acceptable forms of dress and forms of interaction with those of various rank within the company. Professional groups such as physicians and academics may also develop a solidarity across the whole profession, sustained by such activities as conferences and journals. The term counterculture has been applied to culturally defined groups and movements which are strongly opposed to mainstream society and seek to promote their own alternatives. The term became popular to describe the variegated youth movement that developed in many Western countries, most particularly the United States, during the 1960s and 70s, which featured a concatenation of social, political, musical, sexual, and lifestyle choices which set it apart from the mainstream. These included demands for the ending of the Vietnam War, the civil rights, free speech, and women's liberation movements, and a more permissive attitude towards drugs and sex. I'm not sure how useful the term is outside of that specific context. Many subcultures, such as the Amish, are clearly countercultural in that they strongly reject mainstream culture and promote their own alternative, but the term is not normally applied to them. Maybe it is the fierceness, apparent subtleness, and political engagement of the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s that marks it off from other subcultures. In any case, we should look for parallels in the survivalists of the contemporary United States or such totalitarian cults as the People's Temple, whose members committed mass suicide in Guyana in 1978. Large-scale migration, both within and between societies, has become a common feature of the modern world. People from an often alien society and culture are relocated. One of the features of 19th century societies undergoing industrialization was massive urbanization, with millions of rural people seeking new lives in factory towns and commercial centers, both within their own country, as the large numbers of Irish who settled in London and other big British cities. Remember, at that time Ireland was part of the UK, or internationally, with millions of Europeans migrating to the growing United States of America. The development of new opportunities for farming, as in the American Midwest, or indentured Indian labor on plantations in various parts of the British, French, and Dutch colonial empires, and commerce, as for Chinese in Southeast Asia, attracted many more. Massive new surges of migration have occurred since World War II, both with the movement of peasants from villages to rapidly growing cities in their own countries, as in China, and internationally. In all cases, new migrants have often initially stayed together in particular neighborhoods and communities for mutual support and the preservation of the cultural life of their place of origin, what I have termed enclave communities. Thus, the development of concentrations of people from particular ethnic groups in big cities such as London and New York, the Chinatowns of some Southeast Asian cities, and the ethnically based rural communities that developed in several countries. Later, as the new migrants became settled and more prosperous, they might begin to integrate into the host society, adopting its cultural patterns and preferences. Integration occurred more readily in some cases than in others, with both the migrants' desire to conserve their own culture and prejudice and discrimination against some migrant groups by members of the host community serving to lessen integration. Generations later, the result is a vast array of different outcomes, ranging from full integration, as theoretically in the American melting pot ideal, to continued separation. Thus, we can contrast, for example, the descendants of those 19th century Chinese who migrated to Thailand with those who migrated to Malaysia. The Chinese in Thailand integrating and often intermarrying with indigenous Thais, whilst those in Malaysia remain separate, in part because of the need to convert to Islam if they wanted to marry Malay women. Again, those East European Jews who migrated to New York City, who remained members of Hasidic groups, tended to remain separate in their own communities, whilst those who adopted a more secular lifestyle were more likely to integrate. Some migrant groups make determined efforts to preserve their own separate identity and choose to remain isolated from the environing society, but others don't. So thank you for listening, and in particular many thanks to my Patreon patrons, Ian Palin and Tricia Williams. If you like these videos, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel. I will try to answer any questions you may have about this video in a future one. Those who want to support the development of the channel can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I'll give details below the video. You can also click the like button so that I can get an idea of which videos are of greatest interest to viewers. Next week I'll talk about the relationship between different socio-cultural groups, and that will be the last video in this particular set on basic sociology. So have a good day.